Everyone, come on into the room. We begin in a few minutes, but welcome, welcome, welcome. If you feel so inclined, why don't you take a look at our poll? We'd love to see where everyone's coming in from tonight. And I did not make this poll. So I could just say the New York or anywhere outside New York is cracking me up. If you want to be more specific, you can put it in the chat. But welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so glad you're here. And we're excited to have a great conversation tonight.
There we go. I was just saying it's so quiet and I was muted. So that's probably part of the reason why we're so quiet.
I just sent you, yeah, I love it. Come on in, everyone. Come on in.
Grab a cup of coffee. Make yourself at home since you're probably at home. Ooh, my God. I need to update my picture where I show a bit of my gray hair.
Well, everyone, welcome, 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 welcome. We are so elated to have you in the virtual space with us for this, our first of many conversations for the Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab housed at Union Theological Seminary. I am just thrilled to have each of you with us, and I know there are more folks coming. We did a little poll just as a bit of an icebreaker, and it looks like based on who we have in the room, the majority of the folks thus far significantly are outside of New York State. So would love to know where you're from. Just drop your state in the chat. We'd love to know who has joined us today. I am Dr. Gabby Cudjoe-Wilkes. I have the pleasure of directing the brand new Technology, Innovation, and Digital Engagement Lab Fellowship here at Union Theological Seminary. And we're just thrilled. We're thrilled to have you all here. And some of our fellows are likely going to be making their way into this conversation as well. And so later on, I'll give an opportunity for them to wave at you all and give you all a quick hello. But I want to jump right into introducing our guest for today, and then we're just going to have a conversation. I am so thrilled to welcome to our speaker series. When we were thinking about who to kick this off, Lorenzo was just the first thought. We were just like, you know, you're gonna see his energy, his wit, his intellect, and his innovation just made him the right choice. And so,
no pressure at all, though.
no, well, yeah, you gotta live up to this now. You gotta live up to this now. Let me officially just kind of read his introduction so that you know, read his bio so you know who's in the room. The Reverend Lorenzo Labria, D-Min MBA, is internationally noted as an expert in the innovation field. Father Lorenzo is the Chief Innovation Officer of Virginia Theological Seminary and the Executive Director of Tri-Tank Research Institute, which focuses on advancing theological research to meet the evolving needs of the church in the modern world. Before launching the Tri-Tank, Father Lorenzo was the Chief Development Officer for the Episcopal Diocese of LA Any Episcopalians in the place? If so, drop it in the chat. He also served as the pastor on behalf of the bishop at St. John's Episcopal Church in San Bernardino, California, and as a priest associate at St. Athanasius Episcopal Church in the Cathedral Center of St. Paul in Los Angeles. He's in LA right now, soaking up those LA sun rays. He studied at the General Theological Seminary in New York City, earned his MDiv, where he also earned a Doctor of Ministry from the Virginia Theological Seminary. Before entering seminary, Father Lorenzo was president and CEO of Seraphic Fire and Firebird. Seraphic?
Yep.
Seraphic Fire and Firebird Chamber Orchestra, Miami's professional choral and orchestral ensemble. He was also the Miami program director for the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, responsible for a substantial grant portfolio and the launch of the Knight Arts Challenge. Having been general manager for the Radioactive Hispanic Radio and editor-director of operations for Miami's community newspapers, Father Lorenzo has a vast media and marketing experience, which is, again, why he's the perfect first choice to kick us off. Beyond the D-Min and MDiv, he also has an MBA and a BA from Florida International University. He completed the full training at the fundraising school at Indiana University. He is a certified foresight practitioner from the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto, has a certificate in design thinking from IDEO in Palo Alto, California, and is a graduate of Rice University's Executive Education Program. You all can see why I am just so elated to welcome Lorenzo to this space. He is just a phenomenal leader. And before I get you off the hook, I know it's always awkward when we read bios, but I want to read a little bit about the TriTake Institute, the TriTake Research Institute, because so much of what we will talk about today is really going to be connected to that work you're doing there, as well as your book. And so let me just give you a little bit about the TriTake Research Institute. I hope y'all are still listening, because there's some good stuff here. At the forefront of ecclesiastical innovation, the TriTake Research Institute embodies the synergy of tradition and transformation within the Episcopal Church. Founded to address contemporary theological challenges, TriTake leverages data to empower church leaders with actionable insights and adaptive strategies. Their mission encompasses a dual commitment, honoring rich faith traditions while proactively addressing societal shifts to ensure the church's relevance for future generations. TriTake has initiated groundbreaking experiments across the U.S. The evolution into a research institute marks a strategic expansion into rigorous sociological research, particularly focused on engaging young adult families, a demographic critical for the church's future, yet profoundly underserved. Will you all please help me welcome, just in the chat, just give a little hello, a good to see you, we're glad you're here. Help me welcome Father Lorenzo Labria. We're so glad you're here. Yeah.
I bring my own clapping.
Yes, emoticons.
The only way I get some.
Yes, all of that. We love all of that. And so, so Father Lorenzo, before we get into it, just hello. If you want to greet people and give a hello to them, we welcome you to do that now.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. It is so good to be with you all. Anytime that I'm invited to speak about innovation, or in this case, to particularly speak a little bit more about evaluating, I am all in, because I think that we in the church have a duty as part of our stewardship to always make sure that we are not only innovating to keep up with the times. And by the way, innovation just means a new way of doing something we've done before. It doesn't necessarily, I'll give you an example. When Martin Luther, for those of us in church settings, when Martin Luther decided to take songs from the bar and put, religious words to it, that was an innovation. In 325, during the Council of Nicaea, when they decided to put all the beliefs at the time into one creed, that was an innovation. So innovation doesn't always have to be technological or in that sort of sense. Innovation is really about who advancing sort of forward and moving forward, which I think for those of us in church, that it is following the Holy Spirit. At the same time, I think that many nonprofits, many church settings, we sort of get away with not evaluating and seeing whether or not what we're doing is making sense or having an impact. by saying, well, we're doing this work, we're nonprofits, right? So we have a lower standard, where I'm like, no, we should have a higher standard. We need to make sure, because we have such few resources, that they really are having the most impact that they can have. And so that's why this conversation, I think, is so important, and why I love to have this conversation.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so, so much. So we're gonna get right into this conversation. Just by way of housekeeping, everyone, we will be together for about an hour. And so we encourage you, if you have a question that comes up in the moment, to drop it in the chat. Our phenomenal David Gasworth, who is the VP of Online Innovation at Union Theological Seminary, is here with us. He is extraordinary. He is literally the person who wrote the grant to get the funding for this work. And so he's a dear colleague, and he is going to be making sure that we're keeping track of the questions that come forth. So you do not have to wait until the Q&A period. You can put them in the chat, but we will hold about a 20-minute period of questions and answers. There he is. There he is. There's David. We're so glad that we are able to do this work together. David is phenomenal. And so please, as we're talking, if things come up for you, we want this to be interactive. The whole reason why we are launching this speaker series is because when we launched the TIDEL Fellowship, we had 3 times the number of applicants than we had slots and spaces. And so that told us there is a huge desire and demand for leaders in faith-based sectors to focus on innovation and technology-driven innovation at that. And so this speaker series is our attempt to bridge the gap, not just with our extraordinary fellows, but with all of the folks in our community who are interested in doing this work and having a tribe of people to do it with. So we want these conversation series to benefit you. And so while I will guide the conversation series with some questions that are just up my sleeve that I want Father Lorenzo to speak to, your questions make this your questions make the moment, right? So please don't feel like there's any question that is off limits, right? So with that, let's get going. So Father Lorenzo has a phenomenal book entitled How to Try.
Ooh, I have it here.
Oh, yeah, wonderful. Please, please, please. It's an extraordinary best-selling book. It is a thin book, which I appreciate. As leaders, we don't always have time to read those thick books. And it really is an on-the-ground, just phenomenal resource. So I want to first recommend, if you don't have it, that you pick it up wherever books are sold. But in your book, Father Lorenzo.
I also have, by the way, it's available as an audiobook as well. If you want to, like, if you're having trouble falling asleep at night,
There you go.
I will read you my book, and you will have no trouble falling asleep anymore.
You can help them with that. I love it. So let's just kick off with some of the things that you have in your book. Actually, you talk about in the introduction of your book that the Tri-Tank Research Institute, you talk about it as a place to think, explore, innovate, and to try. And I love a story that you tell that I actually just want to start with. You tell a story in your introduction that when you were launching this institute, this kind of partnership across 2 seminaries, and talking to the deans and trying to figure out if this was a good fit, you named in your book in the introduction that after you all had discussed all the possibilities, you asked them, so how will we measure success? How will we know if we've been successful? And you said in your book that the 2 responses you got from the 2 deans, one of them said, well, it will be successful if we failed more often than we've succeeded. And then the other dean says, we'll be successful because we've tried 100 things. And then you say, fail often and keep trying. Right. So you said once you heard that, you were like, I'm in, this is great. You know, this is the kind of culture where I can do this work. And so I want to start there. You're a chief innovation officer, you're an executive director. I want to ask you to define failure. Because we hear this a lot in innovation work. Everybody's like, don't be afraid to fail. You know, John Maxwell, fail forward. You know, we're excited if we fail. But the reality is that's a very counterintuitive experience because nobody desires to fail, right? I mean, just to be honest, like nobody is like hoping that we fail.
Exactly.
So can you speak to how you define failure and why that sentiment made you feel more comfortable to do this work?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, because there's a lot of people, and especially well-meaning people, when we say you really never fail because you're always learning something. And I get that. I totally do. But I think to today's topic, the question really is what we all have a definition of something that is not working, that is not failing. And that is because, at least in TriTank, when we're starting a new, and we call them experiments, what is in reality action research in the field. But when we set out to do like an intervention or to do something that we think is a little bit out there, we always be one of the things that we do, and it's talked about in the book, page 77. I just happen to memorize that page, and I can put it as a link so that you can also all get this. We come up with what's called a mission canvas, which is 9 areas. And it's kind of like a mission plan or a business plan. It comes from Lean Canvas in the business world. We just adapted it to our settings. And what it does is it forces you to look at 9 different areas, like where are you going to get the funding? How are you going to get to the people that you're trying to get to? What's your elevator pitch? Simple things. But one of them, number 9, is what are you going to measure to know whether or not this succeeded? Which was sort of the question that I asked of these deans, which was, how will we know in 5 years whether or not we've succeeded? By the way, we're at 96 experiments, and we have 2 more coming. So we're we're not yet at the 6-year mark, but
Since
we're
I was gonna say you
we're
launched in 2019. Yes, that's
yeah,
impressive.
January 2nd
96
of
experiments in
2019.
6 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating, though, is when you set out to say these are the things that I want to achieve, it does 2 things, or at least that it helps me do 2 things. The first thing is it makes me make sure that I am not in love with a project for the sake of the project. And here's what I mean by that. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to distribute copies of my book, and what I'm going to measure, or I'm going to sell my book, and what I'm going to measure is I want to make sure that people learn what's in here. So I'm going to create some videos, some podcasts related to it or whatnot. And I'm like, great, that's great marketing. How will I measure whether or not that's succeeding, right? And let's say that I'd say I want to make sure that 100 people within the span of a year have learned everything that's in my book. Awesome. What I do then, and what it should help us do, is once we have these indicators that we're going to measure by, is my ideas were that I was going to do a podcast and that I was going to do, give away certain. Is there a cheaper, perhaps better way of achieving the same outcomes? So you see what that does, that question, by knowing what the outcome that we're trying to measure is, by knowing that, I can say, is this project the best way of going about it? Or have I become so enamored with the project because I birthed it, I came up with the idea, that it now doesn't matter what the outcome is? And a lot of times that's what happens, where we're like, oh, but I created this and it's going to be so cool if we do it. It's like, that's great if we want to do that. But based on the
Is
outcomes,
that failure? Is the failure forgetting what you look to measure in the first place, or what part of that is failure?
well, if you don't set out to measure something, whatever that is, then I think by definition you're either always going to succeed or you're always going to fail, right?
Okay.
It's hard to do that right. But I think if you're doing the analysis, you say we're going to measure these 3 things, and then you say there's a cheaper, easier, better way of doing it, but I'm still going to do this thing, then you're making a conscious choice. And at that
Mhm.
point, you need to realize to yourself, am I setting myself up to lose here, to fail? Am I setting myself up that I'm spending way more than I need to? One of the things that I really go into in the book is talking about minimum viable prototypes. What's the easiest way that we can measure whether there's a there before we try it? So let's say, for example, that you're going to, let's say you want to build a preschool, and
Yeah.
that's going to help fund the rest of your nonprofit, the rest of your ministry. And you go, by the time that you go out, you find you might already have the space, but by the time you get all the requirements, you hire people, and then you put all your ads, everything about it, and all of a sudden it doesn't work. You're like, oh, we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, where sometimes the easiest way, what if you just create a landing page for said preschool, and you run some ads on Instagram that says there's a new preschool coming to this neighborhood, and you geo-target it just around the neighborhood where you are, and you see whether or not people click on it. If you put it out there to the marketplace and nobody clicks on it, nobody
Yeah.
engages with your ads, then that should give you pause before you go out and spend a lot of money to see whether there's a there. You see what
Okay.
I'm
So let
talking
me
about?
so let me ask you. So in that spirit, I love this. I love this language of whether there's a there. I love that. I also just love play on words. But so okay, so in that kind of example, this preschool, right? You've run the ads, you haven't spent too much money yet, you're trying to diagnose. I'm still trying to get to the failure piece. Is what in that instance would be a fail? Because we're talking about this statement that if we fail, more than we win, then we're doing it right. So what would be a fail that you
In
would
that
diagnose?
example, the way you could look at it would be if you put out Instagram ads. Actually, you're probably going after young adult parents, so you might be going to a little bit of Facebook and a little bit of Instagram. That's what they're into. You
Hmm.
wouldn't go TikTok. That's way too young. But if you run those ads and nobody clicks on it,
Yeah.
then what's failing there, or what the available data is telling you, is that there is not a there, that parents aren't interested in your
Hmm.
school. And so the
Hmm.
failure would be of the original idea. And then what that calls us to do, and this is why failure is never really failure, and why failing is okay, and why they say fail fast, is because theoretically it's a cycle. You come up with an idea, you go out, you try it, you evaluate it based on what you thought you were going to do, and then
Uh-huh.
you realize, do I need to pivot? Maybe what they're looking for is not so much a preschool. Maybe because of the way your neighborhood is set up, what they're looking for is after school care or something else, something totally
Yeah.
different. So, which is why step one of the design thinking, for those of you familiar with design thinking, you know that it can run from 8 to 12 steps.
Yeah.
I narrowed it down to just 3 steps, which is why the book is so simple, because I
I
wrote
got
it
look,
as,
you ahead of my notes now. You
sorry, sorry,
stealing, you're
sorry, sorry.
stealing what I'm
I'll be
doing.
quiet.
Because
I'll go
I
away.
have on
Woo.
here.
I'll
I
be like a
have on
Muppet.
here based on your three that you've narrowed it down are generate insight,
Yep.
develop ideas,
Yep.
and try. Did I get it?
Yep. You sure
I
did.
got it. And you say in your book, which I love, you say that a lot of times in faith-based settings, we skip the generate idea phase and we go straight to idea and try.
Yeah, we skip the generating insights, right? So here's the
Yeah.
thing. So
Generate
let's
insights. That's
say,
right. Generate insights.
yeah, only because I can see him on my screen, Mr. Williams. Hello, Ed Williams. Nice to meet you. So let's say that Ed and I decide, you know what, we need to reach young people around us. And like really well-meaning church people, Ed and I will sit around a table. If you notice, both Ed and I have some white hairs, that keep coming. I don't know why. I think they all have names, but and so we would sit there and be like, well, what did I do when I was young? I used to go like skating. So why don't we build a skate park? And then Ed and I are like, yes, we should totally build a skate park. We spend like $15,000 to build a skate park. And all of a sudden we're like, well, where are the young people using the skate park? And it is only then that we realize young people are much more interested in video games today indoors than they are in skate parks. Young people, maybe they're not even around in our neighborhood. We didn't do that research to find that out. So when you do the pre-step, which is step number one of figuring out, and there's a systematic way of doing this, right? You begin by looking at secondary research, and you do your own research, then you do interviews. It may take you a little bit more time, but if your
Mm-hmm.
ideas will be like 20 times, maybe 100 times better, just because you're basing your ideas on actual data. And
Yeah.
every time that we do that, we're going to come up with better ideas.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And I like to say this, for those of you who are here, I don't know what sectors you're from. I don't know what faith traditions you represent. I don't know what organizations or institutions you represent. But I always believe that folks who work in faith-based settings, this is normally our strongest point. We normally are really good at generating insight because normally we are good we try to be good listeners, we try to be good observers. Normally, we honestly do this kind of assessment really well. We kind of lead with our heart and we listen to the people. And that can really be a strength as you look to do innovative work. Part of why I started with the failure conversation is because I do think that as wonderful as it sounds to be excited about failure, I find in my work that so many faith leaders are so concerned about failing, largely because they don't want to fail the people they're serving.
Oh,
And I think
it,
it's so
it gets deeper
critical.
than that. Gabby, you have to
Yeah.
think. when we're doing it in the church, you also take on this mantle of like, I'm doing it for God. So have I just failed God? Which is
Have
a
I
complete,
failed the people? Have I failed God, who God has made me a steward of these people, right? And also, am I making am I being too playful, right? Because there's a lot of play that connects with innovation, right? Am I taking this too lightly, right? Am I working on these projects while I should be meeting these really like larger and more significant needs, right? And so part of why this conversation, and for those who are tracking with us, part of why we're talking about measuring impact when doing innovative work, is that I want us to really get to a point, and Lorenzo, you help us with this, get to a point where we can see even our trying as a form of impact.
yeah.
That you're actually leaving an impression every time you try to do something new in a space that you're in, to meet, age-old problems, right? And so
Absolutely.
I want to kick us to, I'm sorry, go
No,
ahead.
I
I
was
had
just going
something
to
I wanted
say
to.
Susan's concern that she put in the chat, which is wasting limited resources, is indeed a concern, right? You don't want to just go out there and which
Mhm.
is why, as you're doing this, right, in the process, when you get to the third part, which is how do you actually go out and try your ideas, coming up with a minimum viable prototype, like the one I just mentioned, right? Running ads on Instagram to a landing page that only captures emails and says, thank you for being interested in our preschool. If you want to find out more information about when it's going to launch, drop your email here. You can see how many people went to it, how many people clicked on the ads, how many people give you their emails, right? All that will cost you less than $200 versus actually going out and like building the school, which could be tons of money, right? So
Yeah.
the key is always stripping away, but you can only strip away if you know what you're measuring. If you know, like what we're looking at in the school idea is to, we want parents to be able to want to come here. So it's like, okay, we're looking for parents. So how do we achieve that? Well, let's see if parents will be willing to give us their email addresses, right? That's a start. Will they
Yeah.
come to our webpage? So yeah, that's exactly what it is, Susan. It is actually being a better steward of the very limited resources and continued limited resources of the church.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk frameworks.
All right.
You've brought some frameworks tonight. Of course, everyone, for those who are just joining us, we are talking about impact, the ways in which one can measure impact when you are doing the work of innovation in faith-based settings. We've talked a little bit about failure. We've talked a little bit about the importance of prototyping at a smaller scale, so that we can really get a sense of the insight that comes from listening and doing some of that ethnographic research. But Father Lorenzo has brought some frameworks for measuring. And I know this is the bread and butter. This is the meat of why some of you came. You all said, measuring impact, I'm coming. Because that's the one thing I can't do. I cannot explain to my community the impact of what we're doing, apart from those who are on my team. So let's jump into that, Father Lorenzo. And I believe you have some things you want to share even by the
Yeah,
screen.
I
So
have
go
a
for it.
couple of things. What I want to do, thank you for that, Gabby. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you three frameworks, and you don't have to take notes on what I'm about to show you. I just know that sometimes it's easier for people to see it. So I have a 4-slide presentation that's going to show you three frameworks, so you can tell that it's not very detailed. But I've also created a PDF, which I will drop in the chat the moment that I'm done explaining them to you, so that you can actually have it written out with the steps that you need to do. So do not worry about taking copious notes right now. Just try to be with me as we're doing this work. And I think that that will be sufficient enough for you to sort of get it, and to the point that you understand, like, oh, I see where he's going with this. Okay. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Oh,
And Lorenzo, while you're sharing, another housekeeping note, the playback of this conversation will live on our website. So it may take a few days before we can get it up, but people will also have access to that. And we'll e-blast out to all registrants a link to the playback on our YouTube channel.
thank you. Yes. Okay. I've been given the permission to share, so I'm going to go ahead and share with you this short presentation that I've created here, so that we can talk about what's on it. And especially because I'm sharing these three of the art. This is what the title was, right? So I just wanted to stay with the title. All right. So as we're doing this, I'm going to share with you three different frameworks, and these are them. I'm going to talk about theory of change, And we'll talk about that, how you map this. What I love about theory of change is that you theoretically would use this one if you haven't already started what you're doing, because this one allows you to begin by imagining the end first, and then you walk your way backwards, and along the way you figure out what are those milestones that I should be reaching. So that's theory of change. The logic model is a visual representation that basically links all of your resources and your activities, your outputs, and your outcomes of a program, which is, for those, since most people are visual learners, it's a good one for people to use. So we'll talk a little bit about that one in a second as well. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about, and you probably have heard, especially if for those of you in the New York area, of KPIs, key performance indicators. Right? These key performance indicators basically are, what are the things that you need to measure? And all of that is based upon, when we created something, what were we trying to achieve? And I'm actually going to draw out a fourth one in a moment after I go through these three. So real quick, let me go ahead and go through these three so that I can give you some. So theory of change, this is how it sort of works, right? You begin by defining your long-term goal. This is the desired impact that you're wanting to have. If you're a nonprofit working in affordable housing, for example, or you want to reduce homelessness, these are some of the things that these would be your long-term goal. So it might be that you want to reduce homelessness in your small community, but probably not in New York City, but in your small community by 50% in the next 5 years. Then what you look at is you identify, so that's your goal, right? Remember, we're walking backwards. Then you need to identify your preconditions. What this means is, what will need to happen for the outcome that you want to happen, right? So let's say that you're doing the homelessness thing. So your precondition must be that you need to increase the access to affordable housing, or you need to improve job training programs, provide more mental health support. There's a couple of other, things that these would be a preconditions. It's not just going to happen overnight. There's some things that you need to do. And by the way, the same way that this works for a big systemic problem, perhaps like homelessness, it can also work for a small thing that you want to do at your place of work or at your faith community that could also use it. Then you map out the activities. So you've got the goal, the preconditions that must exist for that goal to be achieved, and then you map out the activities that will end in the preconditions. So in order for us to have, for example, as we articulated, we need to increase affordable housing. Well, what are some of the activities that need to happen here? Working with developers, whatever it might be, right? There's certain activities that will lead to that precondition, which can then lead to our big goal. And if you notice, every step of the way you can measure, because before the activities, you're going to allocate the resources to do those activities, right? So you need to figure out, again, as you're going backwards, the goal, the preconditions, what will make the precondition happen, what do we need, basically, what are the resources that we need so we can allocate for it to happen. And then you begin with creating indicators, which is along every step of the way. I'm sorry, towards the end of the theory of change here, what you want to do is you want to go back to all these 4 steps that make it up, right? The activities, the resources, the activities, the preconditions, and then finally the goal that you have in mind. All along the way, you need to have, it's kind of like project management. You need to have basic indicators along the way to see that you are on track. And that's pretty much how theory of change works. And again,
So before you move, Lorenzo,
yep.
thank you so much for walking us through this. I'm going to take a quick moment and put a participant on the spot.
Ooh.
If there is one brave participant who has something you're working on right now, and you want to kind of have us do these 5 phases with you very quickly. It's got to happen in just a few minutes. But you're in the room, and we want to leave space for those who are in the room. So would anybody, you can raise your hand, would anybody like to share an initiative you're looking to push forward, a project you're looking to push forward that you would like us to walk you through these phases? I see a hand. David, I can't
It's
see
my
the
friend Ed
name.
Williams. Woohoo!
It's Ed. Okay. And I believe Ed is a recent UTS grad. I think I saw him at commencement. So congratulations. Look at you still in the classroom, even after your I think he has a doctorate and all these other degrees, so he just loves the art of learning. But Ed, yes, please go
He
ahead.
might, he probably is not able to speak. He might still be muted and unable to unmute.
Oh,
So
that's
David's got
let
to,
me ask you to unmute, see if you can do it now.
there we go.
Yes. Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Gabby and Father Lorenzo, for this moment. I will be brief. So, um, while attending graduate school, I thought to initiate a nonprofit, and the objective is to address education and economic injustices. I'll just take one piece of this real briefly, and that is to utilize college students as tutors to assist, supplement K through eighth grade at our local church. That would be the first phase. Um, and to certainly build in there a pre-test and a post-test, utilizing one of the wonderful universities that we have in the city of New York. The launching pad, the ideal vision would be, since many churches have underutilized spaces, to engage churches in the Flatbush, Brooklyn area so that they
Yes.
can be satellites where we would have this partnership between colleges, churches, and some university that will do the pre and post test.
All right. So what is your long-term, let's go ahead and do theory of change. Ed, what is the
Yep,
long-term goal? As you look out here, if you've achieved what you wanted for these K through eighth graders, what would you have achieved?
absolutely. So in one piece of it is to uh, make better grades, proficiency, competency in the area of STEM. That's
Okay.
one part of it.
So let's just
And
look at it
yeah,
from the
let's just do
purposes
STEM.
of the grades, because that's an easy one for us to understand. So
Right.
great, that's the long-term goal. What would have to happen for their grades to go up?
Well, testing would be the measure. Their report card would indicate if they
Well,
are in the
correct.
fifth grade.
That's how you would measure it. But what needs to happen to the students themselves in order for their grades to go up? Is it more study time? Is it more, what would be a precondition that must be present? Do they just need to spend more time with their books? Do they need to, what do you think needs to happen?
A better understanding, for example, of math.
Okay, so they need to be better at math.
They need
So
to be
in
better
order
at math.
for, so that's a precondition, right? Better at
Right.
math leads to better grades. Awesome. So then what are some of the activities that could make them better at math?
Well, we would have a tutor to provide them with hands-on
Perfect.
instructions face to face. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So you realize what we've done, right? Better grades, better knowledge of math, tutors to get to that. And so the first step of the theory of change is, what are the resources that we would need in order to have the tutors, which would allow them to get better at math, which would allow them to get better grades? Right. And I don't know what the amount, let's just say for our purposes here is you need to have $100 a week for them to have a tutor for the week. So multiply that times, let's say 10 students, you need to have $1,000 a week. Now you know that for $1,000 a week, we can get, because our theory of change says that if we have $1,000 a week, they can get the tutor. These 10 students can get the tutors. And if they get the tutors, they will be better at math. And if they get better at math, our outcome, which is that they will have better grades in this one area of the STEM, is what we want. So you see how it functions? You see how it sort of works? And then along the way, this is the good part about where you're adding the actual indicators. It's like, okay, let's just go to the beginning. Let's go to the very beginning. It's easy to know. Do we have the resources, right? Are we doing fun? Oh, look, I can do these things. Are we doing fundraising? Are we doing fireworks? Are we doing the fundraising that'll help us get to the $1,000 a week? You know, that's a very simple indicator, because you either have it or you don't. Do we have the, where it gets a little bit trickier is going to be between, I would imagine, when you're doing the activities and the preconditions, because we've assumed here in our theory of change that if we give them the tutors, they will get better at math. So somewhere along the lines here, which is what you were talking about, the pre and post testing, we're going to want to be in and figuring out, are the students actually gaining enough that it will affect their grades, right? Are they actually going up in grade level? I don't know how it is measured in schools, but let's just say it's grade level. Are they getting better at mathematics? So you probably want to test, and it could be internal testing. It could be the tests that the tutors give every week or every 2 weeks, just to make sure that they're moving towards those outcomes. But I think what we're seeing here, and hopefully the picture is becoming clear, that you began with, I wanted to have better grades. What the pre thing that will help them do that is to know math better. The activities that will help them do that is to have the tutors, and the resources we need are X number of dollars. You can see how you go back, and then how you can add, how do we measure along the way? That's one of the great things about theory of change, because it forces you actually to articulate what is your theory of change? What will cause this expected outcome down at the other end? Does that make sense, Ed?
Everybody
Absolutely,
kind of
absolutely.
give some plaudits and congratulations to Ed for jumping out there.
Yes,
Thank you
Ed took
so
the
so much.
challenge.
Thank you, thank
It's
you,
because
thank
we
you.
share the white hair that, we have something in common, Ed and I.
Wisdom.
You know, there's another framework that Lorenzo's going to share, but I just want to echo to the group that what we just did, you probably have done in your spaces of leadership, but perhaps you didn't have the language to call it a theory of change. And so you might have been stuck at, how do I speak about the impact of this work? Because maybe you knew you had kids who need to get better grades, but you didn't necessarily say, I need to get $1,000 raise, et cetera, et cetera. So part of what we hope that you're hearing in this conversation is that some of the work that you're doing in your faith-based areas of leadership, it's already pretty innovative. But when you can map on to the right frameworks, different language, different ways to talk about what you're doing, you can then begin to really measure the impact of your work. And that can also lead to greater resources, greater opportunities, because when you can talk about better, well, not better, but when you can talk about with a particular language, the work that you're up to, you can align with different organizations and entities and funders who are looking to invest in that kind of work. And I have seen so many faith-based leaders doing phenomenal work, but never were taught these kinds of ways to really sum up and name and share what they're doing. And as a result, they get stuck. And so, so I know we've got another framework. I think we got two more frameworks, Lorenzo.
And I think two more frameworks, and then I'll draw one actually if we have a little bit of time. But one of the things I did want to add also to what you were just saying about additional resources, grant givers. I used to work for a foundation. Foundations love theory of change
Yes,
because
they do.
it is clear. It is a clear sort of path. You're actually showing them, because of this and this and this, we'll get to where we want to go. They're like, oh, we get that. Because I'm not going to speak for anyone other than Lorenzo. In Lorenzo's, when he was in parish ministry, those of us in the church sometimes can be a little verbose in how we explain things. And we begin with like, well, since God created time, and this is like, oh, no. I just want to know what your end result is. Let's go back to that, So let's go ahead and move forward here. And the next one that I want to show you is the logic model, which basically is it's this visual representation that links your resources. But you're not beginning at the end with this one. What you're sort of beginning with here is like, what are the resources that we have? Now, this is more like, if you will, an asset-based community development sort of approach to it. It's like, what are the resources that we have? And because we have those resources, what are the activities? You're going to realize that it sounds very similar to theory of change. It's just in the order in which you're doing it. But this is called the logic model, right? Because we have these resources, now we can take these actions to achieve our desired outcomes. And then those are the activities. And then you go right to the outputs. It's like, these are the direct products, right? These are the direct things that we're able to do because we're doing these resources, these activities. So because we have money, now we can reach out to people and do, let's say that we want to organize a community. And because we have now, somebody just gave us a gift of $10,000, what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to do a certain number of activities in the community to gather people around certain issues. And then when you look at that, some of the outputs would be like, well, how many workshops can we hold? How many? Those are directly related to the input, right? Because you were able to put in these monies, you were able to get these outputs. And then past the output comes, well, what are the outcomes? By us informing these people, by doing these workshops, we were able now to organize. And now we have a list of people in our community that will come, let's call it a rapid response network, and they will come out if we want them to. 100 of them are willing to come out and protest or do something, right? So if you're trying to bring about change in your own community, maybe by creating like a rapid response network. And so you begin by like, if we have this money, so it's very similar. This is why I put them together. I didn't want to like, we only have an hour, right? I didn't want to give you too much. So it basically the same as a logic model, but it is inverted the other way, which is you begin with the resources. So if you're going after a certain amount of money or something like that, you can just begin, because we have this, we'll be able to, because we have these inputs, your money, we'll be able to do these activities, which give us the outputs. And that's what's going to create the outcome. Fairly simple, this one as well.
All right. Anybody want to try with their organization? Raise your hand if you'd like to.
It's okay if you don't. It's similar to the other one.
All right, let's
Don't
move
be
forward.
afraid. You saw how I treated Ed. I'm a good person. I promise I won't treat you badly.
Let's move forward. Let's move forward.
All right, here's another one. The key performance indicators. Now, you probably have heard this one if you've ever been around business people, especially those of you in the New York area, right, where you've talked about like, ooh, what are the KPIs? How are they doing the KPIs? All that this really does is it sets up specific measurable metrics that help track the performance of what you're doing and the impact of what you're doing. So this is, if you already have a program that's already started, it's going to be hard for you. You certainly can. But if you do theory of change or if you do the logic model, you may realize that it's like, oh, we need to make some changes to the program, which is not a bad thing, right? To be able to realize that now, because you may not be set up with a clear theory of change. But if you already have a program started that you think is going well, but you actually want to measure it, what you want to do is set up these KPIs. They provide you a clear way to measure the success. And this way you can also realize, are we making the best decisions for a program? This can happen if your funding has changed, or if you just want to evaluate the program to see, are we doing it right? One of the questions I was asking Dr. Gabby before we went on the air tonight was like, now that the program is 6 months old, how are you evaluating it along the way? You want to be able to make sure that you're pivoting or that you're evaluating so that you're always trying to achieve the greatest success based on the outcomes. So what you do here is again, in this one, much like theory of change, what is it that you want at the end, right? What is the objective? Because you need to know what the objective is. Then you select your KPIs. These are the metrics that directly measure the progress toward that objective. Let me say that again, right? So you've identified the objective. Let's say the objective is, I want to teach children how to swim. And so some of the KPIs, these metrics along the way, can be everything from like, okay, how many people are going to be in the program? Where should someone that's just starting to learn to swim today, how much should they be able to do in 2 weeks? Will they at least do the little doggy, paddle type thing, or are they still sinking like a stone? If they're sinking like a stone, something's wrong with your program, right? Something's not functioning. So you want to be able to set up like, by this point, they should be able to do this. By this point, going back to Ed's program, right, where we said he wants to get better grades for them. And in order to do that, he thinks mathematics is the way. So he's got tutors. There's where you want to have your KPIs. You want to figure out how many classes do they need to go to? Because if all of a sudden they're not going to their tutoring classes, it could be that the program's great, but what's happening is they're not participating enough, right? If they're only participating 70% of the time, and you've determined, no, they need to participate 80% of the time, or we don't see a significant change, right? So that could be a KPI. What you also want to measure sometimes is you want to be able to say like, okay, your KPIs could be how many people are we serving to actually make a systemic difference in this one In this one school, for example, there's a theory that says if you only change 5% of a population, that'll be enough to tip it. So maybe you're following that theory of change. It's like if we just get 5% of the student population of this one school to actually go in and change, we can change the whole system there because it sort of starts to spread on its own. Then you also have to worry about, will we have enough tutors for everyone or whatnot? But but some of these metrics that you want to measure along the way is like, are they getting better in math? Are they doing better on the quizzes, right? Where they start is really irrelevant. It's kind of like they tell you, it doesn't matter what scale you're using to weigh yourself. Just make sure you're using the same scale all the way through. Don't keep changing the scale, because that same scale, even if it's broken, it's still going to tell you whether you're gaining or losing. The same
Yeah.
thing. It doesn't matter where the students start, but you want to measure them. Are they getting better or worse? Better
Yeah.
or worse? And just measure that along the way. So once you do that, then what you actually want to do with your key performance indicators is you want to make sure you have established clear targets. Like I said with the kid, right? Is like, if he's still sinking like a stone by week 4, we need to send him back to week 1, right? Because there you get into the whole, like, is this one student going to hold back all the others, right? So you need to be able to say, I'm sorry, we need to send you back to number 1, right? So you sort of do that along the way, and that's how you establish your clear and achievable targets. And then finally, you want to be able to monitor it on a regular basis, which is, I always say, when you're trying something new, especially when we're trying an experiment out in the field, I try to get like weekly updates. I try to get regular updates of how is it going? How are we? Because the sooner
let me interject here, because you're speaking about wanting to get weekly updates actually aligns with a question that came in. And so there's a question that came in from the audience that says, what about measures that seem beyond measurement, or leaders who are resistant to the idea that everything that matters must be measured? Right. So there's a question on the floor that really seems to be asking, how do you respond to a community that doesn't want to be measured or doesn't see the importance of being measured? And there's another question on the floor. I want to get a few of these in because we are close to time. Another question is, do leaders within denominations share information about what is working and not working within their parishes, congregations? If not, why not? So both those questions seem to be in the spirit of what you were just getting into about your commitment to measurement. So maybe we can talk about that.
Here's how I would answer it. If you have people that are reluctant to measurement, and the clear example that I can give you of this would be teachers in a school. The reason part of, and this is Lorenzo, the pastor priest speaking, pastoral sort of sense, is they probably have lost the sense of trust. Is that they've been measured before, but generally to be fired or generally to be cut back, as opposed to, are we all in on the mission and do we want to achieve our mission? There's a difference. So if they're not, what I would do is let's say that, going back to Ed, I would say, Ed, do you want to go out for a cup of coffee? Let's grab a meal. And I'd be like, Ed, so talk to me about why you think evaluation doesn't help us. Our grantors, the people who gave us the money, want to see evaluation. So I'm curious as to why you think, because I'm ready to fight back to them, but you need to give me the reason why you think that won't work. And generally,
let me also add here, a part of that person's question is, what about measures that seem beyond measurement? So let me ask you this, let me interject this. Are there scenarios that exist that are, begin quote, end quote, beyond measurement?
So now you've touched, right, the holy grail for those of us in the church, because we're theoretically, as the church, we're called to make disciples, we're called to transform people's lives. So it's like, can you really measure someone's transformation? It's very difficult, right? I cannot see into anyone's heart to see whether or not they're transformed or changed, but there are some tall tale signs, if you will, of people that have been transformed, right? Generally, they like to talk about their faith with others. So there are some things that are there things that are beyond measure? There will always be things. You can't measure love, right? How much does someone love, unless you put someone in front and say, will you take a bullet for Gabby? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a bullet for Gabby. It's like, great, there's the agape love that scripture tells us about. But so those things are ethereal. They're a little bit more difficult. However, if it's important enough, I would say we need to figure out how do we come up with ways of measuring even things that are difficult. You won't be able to measure everything. You won't be able to get every detail of everything, but you will be able to measure some things. You'll be able to measure how much, if you believe like your curriculum really makes a difference in, let's say, financial literacy, and they don't let that's a wrong one because you can always measure money. But let's say, for example, that it is about you're just teaching people how to love each other more, then you can measure other things around it. You can measure happiness, and there are a gazillion happiness scales. You can measure, they're imperfect to measure something like love or whether or not someone's been transformed, but they're enough for you to know whether or not you're going in the right track. It's like the broken scale. It doesn't tell me my weight exactly, but it tells me whether I'm going in the right direction. Should be going
Yeah.
this way, the scale, right? If I'm going in the right, yeah, I
You
don't
want
want
to
to go
go
this way.
down that up with the scale.
I'm a 51-year-old priest. I definitely don't want to go this way. I want to go this way, right? So it's like, are we going in the right direction, at least of where we think we want to go? That's what
Yeah.
I would say to those that are unmeasurable. As to the
That's
question
great.
about whether
And
or
I
not
would, and I would,
denominations,
let me just add this really quickly, to the person asking that question. I'm also a pastor, and when I first started my church, I started it about 6 months before the pandemic. Of course, nobody knew the pandemic was coming, but that's just how things landed. And you all started in 2019, so you understand this. And so I was having a conversation with a Harvard Business School professor. I'm not a Harvard alum. I just happened to be at an event and was talking to them, and was really frustrated because I didn't feel like I had the quantitative data to tell the story of what was happening in my congregation. I really felt like I wanted to be able to say we went from 0 to 5,000, or we did this, or we did that. And those numbers just were not present for us. And I'll never forget the advice they shared with me, which was, well, measure the impact of the people you have. So if you have 10 people, you have more than 10 stories, right? Because even when you've got very large organizations, it usually still gets distilled down to a few representative stories. And so I would also add that for the things that are not as easy to measure, as you said, such as love, changed heart, etc., we can't measure changed lives explicitly, but we can give narration to folks who are willing to share impact. And it's phenomenal how far that narration can go, and that too is a form of measurement.
and I think if you use, by the way, to that example, yes, I may not be able to measure whether or not people love more or love less, but theoretically, I'm doing this because I want that. And if so, if I see the world, going back to theory of change, if there are more people, right? If this becomes a precondition, if there are more people who are loving people, then what would be some of the outcome? What
Yeah,
would be something that's beyond that? So maybe you
yeah,
cannot measure this, but theoretically, like civil discourse in our congregation or in our community will be better, right? People won't be as polarized if they see each other not as enemies, but as people willing to love each other and talk to each other.
yeah. I hate to say it, but we've got 5 minutes left.
Oh no.
Now you had one last framework you wanted to draw. I think that's a great way to use our last few minutes. If you want to share the
Sure,
last
I am
framework that
looking
you were.
for, where's the whiteboard? Here it is, the whiteboard. All right, so I'm gonna use a new whiteboard for everyone. This is just, it's a simple, if you have already ongoing programs, this will help you just evaluate the programs. I'm just gonna draw it. This is what you wanna do. It's a simple quadrant, right? And what you wanna measure here, and I'm gonna use a term that's not often used in the church, ROI. And what you wanna use
I love that
here,
term.
and what you want to use here is resources. Anyways, you know that I'm spelling resources there. So what you want to do is be able to take all your programs that you have, list them out on a sheet of paper. Then for each one of them, put them on where they go on this quadrant, on these quadrants here. So if you have something that takes very little resources and has very high ROI, do more of these. Do a lot of those. You go double down on those, right? If you have something that takes a lot of resources and has very low ROI, consider stopping these things. Why are you still doing something that takes so much, human power to do, and yet doesn't get you to the outcome that you're trying to do? Why are we still focusing our time there? And then the ones that really cost you to think about it a little bit more is like, okay, this is going to take more resources, but it could be a really good thing for the outcome that we're thinking about. There you go. This is this one. Then there's those. The example that I always use for this one, always here, is like, okay, the men's group that gathers together for breakfast on Thursday, and they've been meeting for like 22 years. And at this point, it's like 3 people that gather. It takes very little resources because we have nothing to do with it. They just sort of gather on their own. But the return for those people is pretty good. So let's keep that going, right? It's not a huge return on investment, but it doesn't take a lot of investment either. What you
Yeah.
really want to question is this section up here. The things that are taking a lot of resources, because to go to one of the points that was made earlier by Susan, right? We have limited resources. So it behooves us to take the time to figure out, are we actually doing the best with it? Because in the MBA class, right, they teach you that opportunity cost. If you're doing something, by definition, you're not doing something else. You just cannot be in 2 places at the same time. You cannot be doing 2 things at the same time.
Cannot be.
So since you're doing this, we're letting something go by. So would the other something be a better thing for us to do than this thing that we're doing? So it's a simple framework. Just take a list, draw them, draw these quadrants, take a screenshot of this right now, and
So
you can have it.
you've got resource on the left, you've got
Oh, there
ROI
you
at
go.
the
Somebody
bottom.
put it for me. Thank you, whoever.
Yeah. See, so you've got resource on the left, you've got ROI on the bottom. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
The return on investment that you have on the right there. Yep.
Yeah. That's great. Lorenzo, thank you so much. There is a question that came up in the chat about
Sure.
whether you do consulting. I would love for you to respond to that question before we wrap up.
Here's the thing. I do help people out, but it's for free. So it's not, I don't necessarily call it consulting. But here, I'm going to put my email.
There you go.
I usually, I set aside a certain number of hours per week that I just talk to people, because I recognize that the wisdom is actually out there, not in my office in Los Angeles. So the more I talk to people all over the country, even if I don't have the correct answer for you, I may be able to connect you to someone that does. So if you want to chat, just go ahead and send me an email. I'll send you out my Calendly. You'll set up a time on the calendar, and I will gladly give you an hour of my time to talk.
Listen, we are so appreciative of your time, of your expertise. I think you have kicked us off in a phenomenal way. You've set the bar high, and we're going to make sure that everyone even those who registered, who didn't make it, we capped out at a very large number of registrants. And so we believe that they too will benefit from this. And so they'll be able to watch the playback. Thank you, everyone who showed up to the first conversation. You took a risk on us. The first one, you never know what you're getting. And so we appreciate you all. And also, I have to shout out the TIDEL fellows that are in the room. I see at least 4 or 5 of them. I'm going to get in trouble by calling names, but I'm going to do it anyway. I see Gail in here. I see Rochelle in here. Who else do I see? TIDEL. If you're a TIDEL fellow, just say something in the chat. I'm looking at the chat. But we are just elated that you all have decided to spend your evening with us. To those of you who came, listen, you too, we consider you a part of our communities. You got to come back because next week we are having a conversation next week. What's happening? What are you pointing to? Oh, Lorenzo's like, I want to talk. They won't let me talk. Let me talk. I want to talk. Go ahead. What you trying to say, sir? What you trying to say?
Okay, no, that I just put in the chat the PDF that has the frameworks. I remember I told you all I would do that. So all 3 frameworks and how to do them with examples are in the chat, so that you can have that with you tonight. Just almost forgot. So there. Now I can be mute.
Okay, no, you're good. You're good to go. You're good to go. Listen, I was just sitting here raving about our fellows. Yes, Jackie is on. And so we are just really excited. We thank each and every one of you for showing up. And also we want to invite you to next Tuesday. And so we decided to launch with 2 back-to-back conversations. We really wanted to start off with this idea of measuring impact because, truth be told, a lot of us just get discouraged when we feel like we're doing all this trying and we can't explain to anybody what we're up to in the world. And so hopefully this has helped you feel more impactful. Next week, we're going to be dealing with a conversation series called Today's Ideas, Tomorrow's Impact, a conversation highlighting the sustainability of innovative ideas. So today we talked impact and measuring. Next week, we're going to talk sustainability. How do you keep your good idea going? We're going to be joined by Dr. Robert Erstein from the Stanford University School of Business, phenomenal leader as well. And Rob is just real cool. And listen, one thing he told me when we met, and I have been saying it from the rooftops, is that in one of his courses, some of his students actually piloted DoorDash in his class and later on refined it, and it's become what we know now. And so we're going to be talking also about teams. There's one piece of Father Lorenzo's book about teams that I didn't get to, but chapter 2 is the T in team. And you talk about the importance of having a T team with a wide range of skills and deep knowledge. We didn't get to that, but it was in my notes for tonight. And so come on back next week. We're going to be talking teams. We're going to be talking sustainability. We're going to be talking impact. And we hope that the skill sets that we are offering you all will help you to do your work in the world a little bit better, a little bit stronger. So thank you for being with us, and good evening.
Thanks, everybody.